Alrighty, let's test these mics. Excellent. Thanks everybody for attending today. We did not expect such a big crowd, but we're really excited to share with you about kind of the collaboration between my team and Angela's team. And we hope it has special relevance to Datadog because it's really all about how we applied kind of security and reliability controls to our own usage of Datadog. So jumping into it, I'm Tanner. I'm from Chicago, or at least I have been for the last 10 years. My team is Internal Trust. We focus on basically Datadog's access to our customers' data and making sure that all of our customers can trust us with their most sensitive data.
And hi, my name is Angela Beteta. I joined Datadog 3 years ago. I'm based in Spain, and I'm the engineer manager of the core observability team. So this team was chartered a couple of years ago to focus on internal Datadog observability posture as a whole. And in short, the mission that we have is maximizing the value of using Datadog internally. One aspect of that is what we call the governance of the Datadog platform. What do we mean by this? So what we do here is that we implement guardrails and limits around the usage of the Datadog platform internally to prevent accidental misuse of sensitive operations. Why we do this? Well, on one hand, we want to prevent, and remove risks of, these sensitive operations, and on the other hand, we want to do it also removing friction from their user day-to-day, common activities. But first of all, what triggered our collaboration, the collaboration of these two teams? Well, over the last year and a half, Datadog has combined site reliability and security engineering in the same organization. And honestly, that broke silos and also accelerated the discovery of common and shared goals, because in the end, this is what we have. We are two teams with these common goals. We are not saying this is the only way to break these silos. It can happen by leadership, finding, these opportunities, or through one-on-ones that you can have individually. But for us, it was key to do that sort of acceleration. If you want to know more about the combined approach, there is a series of blog posts. The first one was written by Bianca Langford, the VP of Security Engineering at Datadog. The second point that is very important here is the proactive risk management that we have internally in Datadog. Pretty much every team goes through this process of assessing risk, and we're talking here about reliability, security, operational risks. And that is very into the planning, process that we have internally, and it's key to understand the priority and the importance and where we have the gaps. So Tanner, tell us more about the motivations.
I think this slide would just be common to anybody who is thinking about security or reliability and thinking, like, what is the role of my job? One, keeping attackers out. Two, preventing downtime. Like, realistically, these are the same goal because the whole central thesis of our teams is to keep our company running, preventing incidents, and keep things moving forward and getting better for our users. So let's talk in more detail about what the collaboration looked like, what kind of the focus areas of it were, and how there are these very common overlaps between security and reliability. First, we can think obviously RBAC, both limiting attacker impacts, limiting the radius and the risk of mistakes, and making sure that actions happen for the right reason. So this was a core thing that we wanted to focus on because we knew that our users may have permissions they don't realistically need for day-to-day operations of Datadog. We wanted to look at our logins and accounts and make sure that we know who is logging into all the organizations that we manage, and being able to limit the risk surface, make sure that no attackers are going to get in, make sure that our controls that we have at Datadog, like mandatory hard two-factor authentication with YubiKeys, all of those types of things, SSO, are all present on all our accounts. We want to look at the mistakes that are occurring. We want to understand why they're occurring and say, yes, a user was trying to do something reasonable and they had a reasonable goal when this mistake happened. So we understand why the mistake occurred, why accidents can occur, or predict that they will occur, and then put padding on those sharp corners. And that means that we have to be highly responsive to those users. We can't just say, this is unsafe, this is risky, and so you can't do it. Like 99% of the time, that will not work. Rather, we need to understand what the case that they're trying to solve is and then give them safe ways to achieve that. Lastly, monitoring and remediation would say this is a core driver for how our teams operate. We want to detect when issues are occurring, like even before we have all the processes and response and runbooks and everything else in the state present for us to prevent that from occurring in the first place. Like that's the first thing that's going to drive us to understanding all the rest of this. And that also, after we achieve some of those protections, ensures we're in a known good state. So, what was our approach to managing Datadog?
Yeah, so let's start from the beginning. Where did we start? First things first, right? Problem recognition. Datadog is critical for Datadog. What if it breaks, right? At this point, previous incidents were a really good source of information to understand the problems, right, and the gaps. We needed to get some more data, so we started with the process of data gathering. Please, Tanner, the second one, yeah. So here we basically ask ourselves, what parts of Datadog are critical for us? Which features, configuration, products, how often, sensitive operations happened, what are the major gaps? And this was key to actually understand what was the current state and the ideal state we wanted to be and plan the strategy to get there. And the final one is ownership, right? We are two teams with different functions in Datadog, and we talk, and we basically agreed on who was best positioned to address, the different issues and problems that we had. And that brought the sense of owning, the problem.
So if I can pontificate at you for a while, we kind of come up with a theoretical approach that our teams are going to take together. And I think this approach is, I call it universal because it's not just for Datadog, but it was really helpful for us at Datadog, but it could apply to managing kind of any complex SaaS, I think. So we started with monitoring. We use CloudSIEM internally, so we will obviously recommend that. We find it really effective for monitoring things that are happening at Datadog. I can tell you that, for example, Audit Trail has recently become a source of CloudSIEM detection rules, so you can use Audit Trail to detect when certain actions are occurring at Datadog. But it helps us to identify what is the risky behavior. We want to just understand what is occurring, how often is it occurring. Obviously, we'll do logs queries and we'll say, okay, in the last 3 months, how often did this happen? Find those known use cases, understand our users. Often, if it's like a rare edge case, there might be only 1, 2 users. If there are 10 still, we want to talk to them and we want to understand, like, what is the context where this action was occurring? Where are you thinking about it going? Is there a safer way? Like, ask them rather than putting something on them. Then we develop our response, right? We build a feedback loop where we are reaching out to those users, making recommendations to them, developing our guidance, developing documentation internally about how we think this can go in the future. And it comes with a recommendation, right? Not a mandate for this date, you're going to do this. Rather, we're going to develop that path over time until we're confident that we can make a transition without interrupting the activity. We're going to document our exceptions because that is going to have to keep happening until we actually come up with a full solution. So we know that there's not going to be a full solution from day one. And we're taking a human approach again. So not being accusatory, even if we know, like, okay, hey, we're late in this process, like, we're expecting you to transition, but like, hey, like coming to you, trying to understand, saying like, hey, would this have worked for you instead? Like, can we talk about it? Lastly, we have really become huge users internally of workflows. We use workflows to do things like notify a user directly when they do something, right? Or for example, for us, we have many different orgs where people are doing testing. We'll do a check-in with them and say, like, hey, did you log into this org? Did you take this action? Can you confirm it? Here's the recommended guidance. Lastly, the enforcement phase is we have a standard operating procedure. We have a standard policy and guardrails for what the users expect to do. We try not to block those good use cases. We try not to block experimentation, and we build a golden path for users to do it safely. So for things like where we have shared resources, we might use infrastructure as code. We might use Terraform for users to kind of collaborate on those together with minimal risk of treading on each other's work. Lastly, it's on our teams to build those safe paths if they don't exist. Like, we are very rarely going out to other people and saying, like, you need to solve this for yourself. We are very active in making sure that they exist first before we try to transition somebody off of it. And communication is a huge part of that. We really like to do that in a targeted way. Datadog makes that so easy. It's basically trivial for me to go in and say, give me a list of 100 users who took an action in the last 3 months, and then I can send an email to those users saying, like, hey, by this date, like, we're expecting to transition, and we make room for feedback, send us back, come to this Slack channel, talk to us.
Yeah, so during this process, we have the ability to actually work closely with the Datadog products, the teams that are building Datadog. And this is also key because it brings understanding on the gaps that the product has, to get us to the ideal state we want to be, and also to fix the issue not just for us but also for our customers. In addition, what we do is that often our teams are best positioned to prototype or explore quickly solutions to those problems, and then those solutions are fed into the sort of design of what the future feature will be offered by the product. And then, eventually, when the feature is ready, we will convert onto that feature as well. So what did we actually do? We are going to share with you some real examples and concrete examples of our achievements over the last, year and a half. Let's start with sensitive permissions. So Datadog startup times, everyone was an admin in our organizations. It was fine. We actually needed that to move fast, but that is not the case anymore with the scale we have. And what happened then, with these broad permissions, we found that there was an increase in the number of accidental, situations where users change a configuration without even realizing, they were doing it in one of our important, Datadog orgs, or because they had these broad permissions, when we put limits and guardrails, they were, so easy to be bypassed without even noticing. So we needed to reduce the number of admins, and this is what we did. So first of all, as Tanner said before telling someone you're not allowed to do this thing, that is not the way we go here in Datadog, right? We want to make sure that there is an understanding on the problem, and there is an alternative solution for them. So what we did to actually reduce the number of admins was to bring a self-service mechanism for users to grant any permission they needed. And that might sound contradictory because we wanted to remove permissions and not add permissions, but it actually was a good path, to have users happy with the admin permission taken away, as they know that at any point they were going to be able to get the permission they needed. And we did it using an internal feature called, request role. Can you go back? Yeah, for a minute. And the users were able to ask for or request that permission and give us also like a reason why, which was also helpful to explore, which other things we could do to improve here. Once we reduce the number of admins by this self-service auto-approved mechanism, the next thing was to lock down the user access managed permission in Datadog in our internal organizations. Why? Because with this permission, anyone can make anyone an admin, including themselves, right? So at this point, what we did was to start managing the definition of our Datadog roles in Terraform. And that gave us a sort of a change management system, right? Where we had a review process, we could assign certain permissions to stewardship teams to review and grant, future requests. And that was successful for us, to start kind of controlling the situation. Before removing the user access managed permission for the users, we needed to know who was actually using this permission. So we mapped the permission to all the different entry points in the API that permission, was needed for. And then we use the audit trail to identify, who used any of these entry points during the last 3 months. With the list of people, we contacted them directly to understand their use cases and see if they were happy, with the permission to be removed. And once we had that, we actually documented this process, because what we found is that internally in Datadog, as people saw that we were making, this process to restrict permissions, to talk about sensitive permissions, there were other teams wanting to do the same thing. So they are now following the same process to restrict more of these permissions with us.
Alrighty, thanks for telling us about all the changes we made to permissions. We're now going to talk about audit logs, and I can imagine anybody who is a security practitioner has realized how critical audit logs are for all the security processes that occur. And we use Datadog for our own audit logs, which I think the extent to which we do that maybe was not envisioned by the early inventors of Datadog. Rather, people were expecting, hey, this is short-term, reactive. No, we use Datadog for high retention, high availability audit logs, and we need those basically to do detection work, to do response, all of those security things. So here is the process of us managing our audit logging capabilities in Datadog, in our own usage of Datadogs. First, we started with what did we want to achieve, right? This was pretty early. We knew here are the goals, and here is what we want to explain to other teams, and here's what we've found successful. But we weren't yet enforcing that across our own teams or across others. Luckily, we had a lot of really good partners, because the people who are focused on audit logs are the security engineers. So they're really willing to do the work themselves to bring those under this kind of management, because they agree with the goals we're trying to achieve. So our next step, and we've been using Terraform a lot, but we terraformed our audit logs indexes. This was a pretty tricky process, I would say, and you might find that the same, because Datadog, I think, has something like 400 audit indexes, probably many more before we started this project, and removed many of the ones that were not actively being used or weren't really important in our most important orgs. But this was a really strong point of collaboration, because it allowed us to take those goals that we wanted to achieve, like high reliability, high availability of our audit logs, and have core observability. Angela's team worked together with us to achieve those. So they helped us out with the terraforming and the management, the communication to all the teams, so that now we have our audit logs that are used for security are the top audit logs that we're gathering into. And there's very little, or at least much less chance, that other teams are going to come in, stomp on those, capture our logs, lose them to retention issues, things like that. So where did they come and help us with that? So it was on two features or two products: the audit logs themselves, the indexes that define which audit logs we're capturing. We had to work together to identify what does that mean? What do we want the retention to be? Where do we want them to go if we're capturing them in S3 or something elsewhere afterwards? And how are those logs processed? So it really relies on pipelines as well. As you can imagine, in a very large org, our pipelines became very complicated. So untangling those threads was a pretty big project, but one that I think we ultimately left a good state where there's a strong idea of what the audit logs indexes are going to be, but we haven't made huge changes to all the other things that are going on in the orgs as well. Lastly, we know that this is critical to us. It's critical to both the security product or the security function, as well as just the reliability function. These logs have to be available for everyone at all times. We consider it basically, I think we would consider it a Sub 1 incident if Datadog was down for Datadog, even if it was down for nobody else, because that is how we function. We are huge users of it. So to visualize a little bit, I didn't get to the visualizing yet. Here's the things we wanted to achieve. So we wanted strong guarantees for integrity and retention, a consistent retention period. We ask our compliance people, hey, just tell us what you want that to be, and we'll implement it. We want to validate which events to capture and ensure the audit logs get priority. They're at the top of our indexes. Our processing for them, they're defined in infrastructure as code. The pipelines all make sense and have all been reviewed. We want to reduce the risk of human error. So that's, again, with terraforming, second reviewers, and we want to reduce the user interface action. So that, again, goes back to the sensitive permissions. So we want to limit the permissions and the number of teams that are actively using those permissions in the Datadog user interface to do things like changing the indexes or changing the pipelines, because we know those are dangerous actions when you're operating with hundreds or thousands of people at the same time. Lastly, defining a consistent format. We found this really valuable. We have standardized it through code changes. I know that there are resources out there that will kind of give you something of a standardized format. We looked at those. We looked at our internal usage. We looked at the audit trail format to understand like what properties are important on a security log. And then we used pipelines, standard attributes, and reference tables to apply those. So for example, we now have a consistent identifier for like an email address of a Datadog employee versus a customer. We're then using reference tables to build in metadata enrichment through our pipelines so that across many different log sources, both our customers' usage of the product, our internal applications, all of those now have these attributes standardized in a normal place. And we can now like create auditing and detection rules. We can create dashboards, notebooks, logs workspaces. All those things can now apply generically across many log sets, where before like you were very kind of or at least have a high friction if you wanted to reference between application A and application B. So here's the visualization I was talking about of before of what our audit logging looks like. This is a visualization of basically which logs are captured in which indexes. And you can see that it's pointed out here that audit logs are captured like way many different places through this crazy tangled web. And that was really not an ideal state because anything at the top could have prevented those audit logs from being captured in a lower position. And here's what it looks like now in the Datadog product. We have all these nice audit logging indexes captured at the top, a standard definition of how the retention is going to occur, and now we can use those for all of our processes, and we're really happy with that. Alrighty, so Angela's going to do our last point on how we manage multiple orgs at Datadog.
Yeah, this is still like a sort of continuous, problem that we are exploring. But as we remediated these solutions, is there a problem with my mic or something? No, it's okay. Okay. So the problem, the question that got an answer was, are we targeting all the relevant internal organizations, to actually remediate these issues across all of them? So this got us to start the definition of a Datadog internal organization typology. So Tanner, please, if you go to the next one. This might sound fundamental, and it is, right? But we spot that there was not like a single way of naming our internal orgs, because Datadog is a multi-org environment, so we have internal organizations for many purposes, for monitoring our staging and production environment and services, for dogfooding, for developing and testing new features, for demoing, to customers. And these orgs, they relate to each other in different ways. We have parent-child relationships. We have also orgs that have relationship cross data center, right? So we decided to put some effort in coming with a sort of simple naming convention of this sort of typology. And with that, we also built an internal catalog of our organizations, to bring this sort of visualization of what we had. And once we had these two things, the next step that we did was defining in baseline or tier, right, for the most relevant configurations and security policies and things that we wanted to implement in all of them, depending on the type. And we implemented them, and we have like auditing and monitoring, as Tanner said, to prevent drift. So what we are doing now, and we will continue doing in the future, is to build more automation on this sort of management, process, because we want to get to a point where we can manage them all in a seamless way.
Alrighty, what is next for us? I think these are probably things that many of our customers are thinking about as well, but we are asking, how do we manage granular internal data access? We know that some of the data that we have in our own internal orgs is not that sensitive. Others of it is quite sensitive. How do we grant that appropriately and access appropriately to the various different teams that need the access or don't? How do we enable those teams to safely experiment? We talked about we can give them other orgs, but they really like when they have this ability to safely experiment, safely test out new features in our most critical orgs as we actually use them, because they have the most data, they have the most setup, they have the most things available, and they don't have to do any extra work. How do we then separate cross-team impact when there is new products, new features, changes going on that really have a potential for stomping on each other's toes? Lastly, we've mentioned it once, we will mention again, we are trying to provide continuous feedback to our product teams about this is what we're seeing, this is what we need. We're participating in those design sessions. We're trying to call out, how do we use this similar to how we think a customer use it? How do we use it differently? How could you account for both of those use cases, or which one should you prioritize? And last point here is just asking, why was this collaboration successful between our teams? I think it comes down to 4 things, 4 principles. So first off, we had this opportunity via the merger between our teams. Second off, we had an alignment. We were really understanding what is the core problem we're trying to focus on, and really mutually recognizing, I think, what do I care about, what do you care about? 99% of the time, they were the same things, or we were recognizing the same goals, which means that we had a strong consensus and agreement of where we want to go, what are the next steps. But even without that, I think if we hadn't been taking accountability between ourselves to say I'm going to do this, you're going to do that, and trusting each other to get that done, even if it takes a little bit of coordination, takes a little bit of time to achieve the final state, we wouldn't have had such success. So that was really great. Thanks everybody for listening to us, and we are really open to any questions you may have, and I think you can go up to the mic.
Thank you.
All right. As they mentioned, we do have about 10 minutes for Q&A. If you have a question, please make your way to the microphone in the center aisle. If you have mobility issues and want me to come to you, just raise your hand.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Question 1, so you talked about multi-org, right? The one challenge in multi-org is for every org, I need to go set up SSO. There is something you can do. I can set up the SSO in a parent level and then distribute it. Is there a roadmap for that?
Yeah, I think it will. So the question was about setting up SSO or other configurations across many different orgs that are being managed. And in this case, it's a parent org to multiple children orgs. Datadog has the same, but we also have across many different data centers we're simultaneously operating in. It is a challenge. It's one that we personally, I think, have solved through both detection and monitoring. So we're relying on that kind of as our first step to detect when things are going wrong, so across all of the different orgs. But it's one we've also solved through Terraform. So we will, when we're creating org, when we're setting up the configuration, we will try to apply those policies in that way. We're still working on that a little bit because it's still, I think, possible for us internally to create an org that's kind of nobody knew that you created it. So we're trying to fix that and kind of reconcile those. And then I know definitely the AAA team at Datadog is working on those. I actually saw it just this week of application of policies that will go down the hierarchy basically from the parent org and flow down to every child org that it's applied to. So I would definitely reach out to them. I don't think we are using those because we're more on the Terraform management, automatic creation side, but the policy application down the hierarchy is a thing that Datadog is working on.
Right. One more question on the RBAC, right? So there are different cases how you can do flat versus multi-org. So in one use case where I have a flat org where I have a SRE team, applications, whatever, and then some other team also access the platform. But the challenge is, right, so there is no tag-based or application-based RBAC. RBAC is more like you can do read or log, but there is a granular, hey, I want to RBAC only this X application team tagged as X application, they should see only those results. Is that something possible now, or is it in your roadmap?
I don't know if it's possible now. Angela, do you know?
Well, are you talking about data or resources access to dashboards and notebooks?
Currently, it's almost read all or nothing.
Oh, yeah. I see what you mean.
I want even the read, but refine it by a tag, okay? If you belong to X team, you could have all the read, but only defined to the tag. That level, is it possible?
So,
Yeah.
okay, so
I understand.
how we are looking at this
Yeah.
internally, and I don't speak for the product teams in all cases, is that we know that they're applying RBAC, like granular RBAC, back to many different types of resources which didn't exist previously. So one example really relevant for me is our detection rules. So I don't want another person who's outside of my team to go into the user interface and like change how detection rules working. So we're doing two things for that. One is like terraform them. So like even if somebody did do that, it would like reapply it. But like that's not really the ideal state or not solving your problem. In that case, what we're doing is we can still define the restriction policies, I think they're called, and we apply those like with a for loop in Terraform. So the restriction policy is applied across all of those different things. And then because you know the Terraform resource has tag X, like our team is trust and safety, we tag all of our detection rules as trust and safety, we can say for each trust and safety tag detection rule, apply a RBAC policy that says only trust and safety can do it. So that's the way I think we are thinking about achieving that, though I'm not quite there yet, but we're close to that.
All right, I think those are 2 questions from.
Thank you.
Super excited to hear more about Terraform being used here. That's been a thing we've been pushing in my team as well. Are you planning to publish or share any of the configuration that you've built? Because like figuring out the right way to use the Terraform provider is kind of a big part of the problem.
I hadn't thought about that, but I will.
Yeah, no, yeah, my team is thinking about, you know,
Please.
like, because the usage of Terraform internally is growing over time, but it also is changing in the way we do things, right? So during the last year, we've invested heavily in making some improvements there to also make Terraform like a more compelling choice for internal teams, you know, to use. Because if they use Terraform, for example, we can start like enforcing tagging, you know, and enforcing other policies, you know, that we want to happen in every resource. So definitely is something that we are kind of investing in. Hopefully, you know, not long, we'll be able, you know, to make you know, something public about the way we recommend things to be done there. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Hello, thank you for the interesting session. So sometimes the freedom of the observability versus the security can be the interesting trade-off. So my question is that, is there any guiding principle or any way of the judgment how Datadog finding the right balance in between the freedom of the observabilities and the security?
I think we lean pretty heavily toward freedom, honestly.
Yeah.
So I think it does go back to the approach that we wanted to take, where it's on the security reliability team to identify like what is the risk going to be, and then get an understanding of that, right? So if we have one user using a permission versus 100 users using a permission, if we have one log source that's, you know, accidentally logged a credential versus 100 log sources with sensitive data, like the approach is really going to be different, and it's going to be individualized versus something that we are trying to raise up and gain like consensus at our organization. I think that things rarely happen at Datadog in my experience without like building, like at least big changes don't happen at Datadog without building that consensus with the teams of coming to them and saying like, hey, we are seeing this risk and we want to work on a solution to it together. And it does rely on convincing. Sometimes you don't always, I would say, like come out with a perfect you know, security posture from those discussions. But like, I think that's the reality of like a modern tech company, and I think it's the right path to choose. And I say that as someone who came from like pen testing, finding vulns all the time, being like, oh, this is the critical, like realizing like, okay, well, there is value that's coming out of this, and you have to really prioritize like what projects, what programs you want to work on, and you have to convince the people like we know and we believe in the right approach. So
There is something beautiful happening here, which I think is also tied back to the proactive risk management process that we have internally. So I remember, you know, like a couple of years or even, you know, before, there was a pen test, you know, done, and when we look at the results, most of the things we knew about, and there were things that we had a plan for, right? And I think that happens because you take with you the responsibility, right? With each of the teams, each team has the responsibility to think about, okay, this is what I'm owning, right? And therefore, I'm not only owning the reliability of these services or systems, I'm also owning them from a security perspective, right? I need to make sure that the policies and the compliance and all the risks that we are seeing through these reports and vulnerabilities, they are covered there, and at least there is a plan. So I think that is key because that makes so easy the conversations amongst teams as well, right? Like you are in a room with different people that you haven't talked with them about something, and all of a sudden you have the same sort of understanding of the situation. And I'm not saying that it's easy to do, right? Because it requires like every team does the same thing and put the same effort on that. But as you can show results, I think they will be more willing to spend the time on this as well.
Yeah, I would almost always like trade some small amount of security risk or reliability risk for just like gaining trust, I would say.
Yes.
Because like the trust and the like showing like, hey, these are the progress of our past results and this is where we're going is like actually leading you down the road that you want to achieve.
Okay, all right, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think we have maybe one more question, but if you do want to jump to the next session, we're pretty close to that.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Going back to the use of multiple organizations, again, within Datadog, at our company, we only use one. How do you deal with the operational burden that it comes with it? For instance, if you need to change roles for teams or for a group and multiple organizations, how do you have a process established that goes well to the users and to the person responsible for managing all that side of the platform?
Yeah, so it's a cross-team responsibility, right? Like there are many teams, when we are spinning up a new organization or a new piece of infrastructure, there are many teams involved. But in particular, to do with the Datadog platform, my team owns a good bunch of tools and systems there. So we basically have a process defined where we go through a sort of waving, process. And then once the systems and the tooling, they are applied to a new work, they just work in a sort of continuously automated manner. So we always put also effort in preventing drift, for example, by having Terraform reapplying, continuously the definitions that is holding over time, right? To prevent that someone goes to the UI and change something that they shouldn't, right? The self-service auto-approved solution has helped also a lot because it's something that we can deploy and kind of target all the different orgs that we want, and it was just fine, since moment zero. So it's like you have to think from the design phase that you are in a sort of multi-org environment, and therefore you need the solution to target more than one and to reapply your sort of definitions from a single source of truth.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. I think is it the keynote next?
Okay.
Yep, keynote's next.
Have
Thanks
a good
everybody.
one. Thank you.